Good morning, students. Let's begin understanding the chapter based on the Egyptian pyramids and the mummies buried inside them. Discovering Tut, the saga continues by A.R. Williams. Before that, let's study these expressions which you might have already studied in the word meanings, which I have told you earlier. Let's revise again. Forensic reconstruction. So forensics is a science you know very well, children, that it is nowadays used in criminal investigations, and it is also used in investigating the archaeological things. So reconstruct anything using forensic science. Funerary treasures. Funerary treasures means the treasures or the which were buried along with the kings of Egypt while their funeral ceremony was being organized. Scudded across means the sky was, as used in this chapter, covered with something. Casket grey, it's a kind of color. Resurrection. Resurrection means coming back to life again. Circumvented. Circumvented means which is covered by. Computed tomography, or in short we generally say CT scan. Airy details. Airy details means minute or complex details. He was just a teenager when he died, the last heir of a powerful family that had ruled Egypt and its empire for centuries. He was laden with gold and eventually forgotten. Since the discovery of his tomb in 1922, the modern world has speculated about what happened to him, with murder being the most extreme possibility. Now, leaving his tomb for the first time in almost 80 years, Tut, in short, full name Tutankhamun, has undergone a CT scan that offers new clues about his life and death and provides precise data for an accurate forensic reconstruction of the boyish pharaoh. Children, please pay attention to this word, boyish pharaoh. It means the pharaoh or the king of Egypt, I am talking about Tutankhamun, died early while he was just a teenager. He was the last heir, means the successor of a powerful family that had ruled Egypt. So he belonged to a powerful empire who ruled Egypt for centuries. So he was laid to rest. He was laid to rest means he was buried inside the tomb along with gold, and he was forgotten till the discovery of his tomb in 1922, and the modern world speculated, means came to know about what happened to him, with murder being the most extreme possibility. So with the forensic reconstruction, it came up that maybe he was murdered. Now leaving his tomb for the first time in almost 80 years. Surprisingly, you might think that how could he leave his tomb when he is dead? But his mummy was being taken out from the tomb for CT scan to find out new clues about his life and death and provide precise data to calculate or to find out about that boy's pharaoh. An angry wind stirred up ghostly dust devils as King Tut was taken from his resting place in the ancient Egyptian cemetery known as the Valley of Kings. Dark bellied clouds had scudded across the desert sky all day and now were revealing the stars in casket grey. It was 6 pm on 5 January 2005. The world's most famous mummy glided head first into a CT scanner brought here to probe the lingering medical mysteries of this little understood young ruler who died more than 3,300 years ago. So the author describes about the prevailing atmosphere there when the dead body was being taken out. Just pay attention. Angry wind stirred up, means wind become angry, and ghostly dust devils as King Tut was taken away from his resting place in the ancient Egyptian cemetery known as the Valley of Kings. Valley of Kings means where ancient pyramids are there. So why the author has sketched up this thing? Children, this is the point to be noted. Let me tell you the story behind this thing. Actually, in Egypt, it is a rumor, or you can say a story, which is being told generations after generations, that the pyramids and the mummies, pharaohs, they are buried, and whosoever will go inside them would be cursed. And those mummies are guarded by ghostly devils. That's why the author has sketched this thing. So it was 6 pm on 5 January 2005. The world's most famous mummy glided head first into a CT scanner brought here to probe. Probe means to examine the lingering medical mysteries of this little understood young ruler who died 3,300 years ago. So it was 6 pm, I think on January 5, 2005, when the mummy of Tutankhamun was moved smoothly and quietly into CT scanner. First of all, his head was put inside. The aim was to examine the persisting, lingering means persisting, medical mysteries of this young ruler. Means the examiners want to know about the cause of his death. Because the king died around 3,300 years ago. His dead body was embalmed and buried in a royal grave in the Valley of the Kings. So his dead body was covered with resin. And why the dead body was covered with resin? To preserve the dead body. All afternoon, the usual line of tourists from around the world had descended into the crammed rock-cut tomb some 26 feet underground to pay their respects. They gazed at the murals on the walls of the burial chamber and peered at Tut's glided face, the most striking feature of his mummy, shaped outer coffin lid. Some visitors read from guidebooks in a whisper. Others stood silently, perhaps pondering Tut's untimely death in his late teens, or wondering with a shiver if the pharaoh's curse, death, or misfortune falling upon those who disturbed him was really true. So on that day, in the afternoon, many tourists around the world descended, means moved down into that rock cut tomb, means that pyramid was cut, and some around 26 feet underground they gazed on the pictures on the walls of the burial chamber and Tut's covered face, and the most striking feature of his mummy, outer coffin lid, means the outer coffin lid of Tutankhamun's was covered with gold, having a gold face. Some visitors, they read through the guidebooks, and others stood silently, pondering or thinking about the untimely death of the king. And some were conscious about the Pharaoh's curse, because it is a rumor among Egyptians that one whosoever will go inside the tomb would be cursed by the Pharaoh. So they were disturbed whether death or misfortune will fall upon him or them. The mummy is in very bad condition because of what Carter did in the 1920s, said Zahi Hawass, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, as he leaned over the body for a long first look. Howard Carter, that is was a British archaeologist who in 1922 discovered Tut's tomb after years of futile searching. Its contents, though hastily ransacked in antiquity, were surprisingly complete. They remain the richest royal collection ever found and have become part of the Pharaoh's legend. Stunning artifacts in gold, their eternal brilliance meant to guarantee resurrection, caused a sensation at the time of the discovery and still get the most attention. But Tut was also buried with everyday things he had want in the afterlife: board games, a bronze razor, linen undergarments, cases of food and wine. So this paragraph, it has been told by Zahi Hawass, who was Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. Antiquities means antique items. So a body or a general body was made of some persons who were the members of this committee, and their responsibility was to check the antique things in Egypt. So Zahi Hawass was its secretary, and he told that it was Howard Carter, who was a British archaeologist, who in 1922 discovered King Tut's tomb. After years of futile means useless searching, its contents, though hastily ransacked, contents means inside the pyramids, children, the pharaohs were buried along with the treasures, as it was considered that the king would need that treasure or essential items in his afterlife. So that was ransacked. Ransacked means looted away. But the contents were still surprisingly complete. They remain the richest royal collection ever found and have become part of Pharaoh's legend. So the government recovered a lot of important things from Tutankhamun's treasure, like board game means and ludo kind of game, or many different kind of board games it could be. A bronze razor was also there, undergarments were there, food and wine was there. So it was Carter who first recorded the Pharaoh's funeral treasures. Then he began investigating his 3 nested coffins. Opening the first, after months of careful recording the Pharaoh's funerary treasures, Carter began investigating his 3 nested coffins. Opening the first, he found a shroud adorned with garlands of willow and olive leaves, wild celery, lotus petals, and cornflowers, the faded evidence of a burial in March or April. When he finally reached the mummy, though he ran into trouble, the ritual resins had hardened, cementing Tut to the bottom of his gold coffin. No amount of legitimate force could move them. Carter wrote later what was to be done. So Carter recorded at first the pharaoh's funeral treasures. Then he began investigating his three nested coffins. The first one had a shroud. Shroud, I tell you, it's a white cloth which is used to cover the dead body. It was covered with garlands of willow and olive trees, wild celery, lotus petals, and cornflowers. Actually, these things were being buried along with the king. These proved that he was buried in March or April, because these celery, lotus petals, and cornflowers used to get cultivated in the month of February to April. Carter ran into trouble when he reached the mummy. The ritual resins had hardened. Actually, ritual resins means the mummy was covered with a kind of liquid for preservation. So that liquid has been termed over here as resins. So the ritual resins had hardened, means that resin had become hard. These had cemented Tut to the bottom of his gold coffin. So the resin which was used to preserve the dead body, it had become hard now, and it had cemented or fixed the mummy of the Tut to the bottom of his gold coffin. The solidified material was removed with the help of chisels. Then the mummy was cut free. The sun can beat down like a hammer this far south in Egypt, and Carter tried to use it to loosen the resins. For several hours, see, this is the map. Here you can see Sudan, Africa. Here it is here you can see there is Egypt. And you can see now the Valley of Kings. Here is the tomb of Tutankhamun, and here is Valley of Queens. So the Howard Carter used hammer to cut the solidified material, and he used chisels. He set the mummy outside in blazing sunshine that heated it to 149 degree Fahrenheit. Nothing buzzed. He reported with scientific detachment that the consolidated material had to be chiseled away from beneath the limbs and trunk before it was possible to raise the king's remains. In his defense, Carter really had little choice. If he hadn't cut the mummy free, thieves most certainly would have circumvented the guards and ripped it apart to remove the gold. In Tut's time, the royals were fabulously wealthy, and they thought or hoped they could take away their riches with them. For his journey to the great beyond, King Tut was lavished with glittering goods, precious collars, inhaled necklaces, bracelets, rings, amulets, a ceremonial apron, sandals seized for his fingers and toes, and the now iconic inner coffin and mask, all of pure gold. So every important material was made up of gold. So Carter in his defense says that if he had not cut the mummy free, thieves would have cheated the guards and had taken away the gold. Along with it, they would have destroyed the mummy in search of gold. That's why he had cut mummy free. To separate Tut from his adornments, Carter's men removed the mummy's head and severed nearly every major joint. Once they had finished, they reassembled the remains on layers of sand in a wooden box with padding that concealed the damage. The bed where Tut now rests. So, in their effort to take out the mummy of Tut, the workers they actually destroyed every joint of the mummy of Tutankhamun. So the Carter's men removed the mummy's head and severed nearly every major joint. Once they had finished, they reassembled the remains on the layer of sand in a wooden box with padding that concealed the damage. So they put the remaining part on the sand and just assembled. To hide, conceal means to hide the damage. The team of scientists found it resting there. Zahi Hawass, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, observed that mummy was in a very bad condition because of what Carter had done in the 1920s. Archaeology has changed substantially in the intervening decades, focusing less on treasure and more on the fascinating details of life and intriguing mysteries of death. It also uses more sophisticated tools, including medical technology. In 1968, more than 40 years after Carter's discovery, an anatomy professor x-rayed the mummy and revealed a startling fact. Beneath the resin that cakes his chest, his breastbone and front ribs are missing. So archaeology has changed a lot in last few decades. Means in 70 to 80 years, archaeology has changed. Children, you might have studied various books based on treasure hunts. I think you understand what is treasure hunt. Means earlier, all the discoverers, they wanted to go to search the treasure hidden at various places. So their main purpose was to get the treasure. But nowadays, treasure or finding treasure has become secondary. So archaeology has changed a lot. Now it pays less attention to treasure and it pays more attention to the fascinating details of life and puzzling mysteries of death. So nowadays archaeology focuses on the mysteries behind the death or whatever rumors that were associated with the person who is there in the tomb. So that has to be rediscovered. So nowadays diagnostic technology uses computed tomography or CT, by which hundreds of X-rays in cross section are put together like slices of bread to create a three-dimensional virtual body. What more would a CT scan reveal of Tut than the X-ray? And could it answer two of the biggest questions still lingering about him? How did he die and how old was he at the time of his death? So it nowadays means the archaeology uses more sophisticated tools, including CT scan and medical technology. In 1968, an anatomy professor, he x-rayed the mummy and he found out a very surprising fact, that is the breastbone and front ribs of the mummy was broken. Now CT scan was employed to answer two questions. Means the mummy was CT scanned to find out the two things, that how did Tutankhamun died and how old was he at the time of his death. King Tut's demise was a big event, even by royal standards. He was the last of his family's line and his funeral was a death rattle of a dynasty. But the particulars of his passing away and its aftermath are unclear. So King Tut's demise means death, was a big event because he was the last of his family or empire. And his funeral was taken away with great pomp and show. But the particulars of his passing away and its aftermath are clear. But it is unclear that aftermath means consequences. That how did he die and how old was he? These two questions are still unsolved. So children, that's all in this video. Rest will be continued in the third or the last part of next video.